Stay there now! Stay there now! Can you see to the run, mate? Can you see to the run? Right, nice.
Roaming the streets in the early hours, armed with a knife, Valdo Calocane stabbed 3 strangers to death. He said voices in his head told him to do it.
He was a university graduate with a promising future, described by his family as a quiet, intelligent young man. So how did he become a killer, stalking the pre-dawn streets of a sleeping city, leaving a trail of unimaginable carnage? This is the full story of Valdo Calocane's terrifying descent into madness. It's a story of repeated, desperate warnings from doctors, his own family, and even his own violent actions, that were all missed or ignored. It's a story of devastating systemic failures that have left a nation asking one simple, gut-wrenching question: how was this ever allowed to happen? In the early hours of June 13, 2023, the quiet, historic streets of Nottingham became the scene of an unfolding nightmare. The first reports painted a picture of a brutal, citywide rampage, a trail of violence that would leave 3 innocent people dead and 3 others fighting for their lives. The man responsible was Valdo Calocane. But this wasn't a simple story of a villain appearing out of nowhere. The man behind the attacks was a mechanical engineering graduate from the esteemed University of Nottingham, and his family described him as a bright, studious boy from a devout Christian home. The city was gripped by fear and confusion as the identity of the attacker emerged, revealing a far more complex and troubling reality than anyone could have imagined. To understand the scale of the tragedy, you first have to understand the man Valdo Calocane was supposed to become. Born in Guinea-Bissau, he moved with his family to the UK in 2007 at the age of 16, carrying the hopes and dreams of his relatives for a better life. By all accounts, he was a bright and studious boy raised in a deeply religious Christian home where education was paramount. His hard work and intelligence were undeniable, culminating in him earning a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Nottingham. He had a future. To his family, he was a quiet, intelligent young man with immense potential. But beneath that calm and promising surface, a ferocious storm was gathering. A severe and debilitating mental illness was taking root, one that would soon shatter not only his life but the lives of so many others in the most brutal way imaginable. The first definitive sign that something was terribly wrong came in May 2020. It started when Calocane, then 28, showed up at a hospital emergency room, convinced he was having a heart attack. He wasn't. Later, his paranoia spiraled into aggression when he returned to his apartment building and kicked down a neighbor's door. The terrified resident, a woman, was so frightened that she jumped from a first-floor window to escape, suffering back injuries that required surgery. He was arrested, and an assessment under the Mental Health Act concluded he was psychotic, yet the risk was deemed low. He was released but re-arrested shortly after for a similar offense. This time, he was detained and admitted to Highbury Hospital. There, in July 2020, he was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a severe illness that can cause profound delusions and hallucinations. Over the next 3 years, this diagnosis would lead to him being sectioned under the Mental Health Act for separate times, a clear and repeating indicator of just how severe his condition was and how aware the system was of his illness. He began expressing terrifying delusions, telling people he was being spied on by his housemates and that mental health services were manufacturing the voices in his head. And right there, that was the first major red flag, the moment Calocane entered the very system that was supposed to help him. Calocane's diagnosis should have been the start of a serious, long-term treatment plan. Instead, it was the beginning of what official reports would later describe as a cascade of errors and misjudgments. He was known to refuse his oral medication, a common and dangerous problem for patients who lack the insight to understand their own illness. Despite this, and despite having 4 clear opportunities while he was detained in hospital, he was never switched to mandatory long-acting injectable medications that could have controlled his psychosis. His family repeatedly raised their concerns, but their voices were not effectively considered in his risk evaluations. They knew he was unwell, but they were never even told that he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
We know Valdo care wasn't up to standard, but reading this note is just beyond anything. You think this could have been avoided, you could have done something.
The risk assessments that were performed were tragically inadequate, often downplaying or completely leaving out key details about his history of violence and his refusal to take medication. Then, the failures piled up with catastrophic momentum. In September 2021, while police were trying to execute a warrant to detain him under the Mental Health Act, he assaulted an officer and went on the run. In January 2022, he assaulted a flatmate, putting him in a headlock. He was admitted as an inpatient that month but was discharged back into the community just 1 month later. By March 2022, he'd stopped attending his appointments altogether, and mental health services completely lost contact with him. In a shocking move that defied all logic, he was officially discharged from the mental health service in September 2022 because of this lack of engagement. A report by the Care Quality Commission later stated that his disengagement should have triggered closer supervision, not complete abandonment. The NHS has since issued guidance telling trusts not to discharge patients for this exact reason. One of the most chilling warnings came from a psychiatrist's note back in July 2020, which read, "There seems to be no insight or remorse, and the danger is that this will happen again and perhaps Valdo will end up killing someone." Just over a month before the attacks, in May 2023, he attacked 2 colleagues at a warehouse where he worked. Still, nothing happened. A warrant for his arrest for assaulting that police officer remained outstanding for nearly 2 years. An inquiry later heard this was because police inboxes simply weren't being checked regularly. The system had failed him, and the public, at every single turn. It was, as the victims' families would later say, a series of critical turning points that were catastrophically missed. Before we get to the events of that terrible morning, it is essential we remember the people whose lives were stolen. Barnaby Webber, who was 19, was a gifted history student at the University of Nottingham, known for his love of cricket. His family described him as a beautiful, brilliant, bright young man, with everything in life to look forward to. Friends called him the antidote to loneliness, a young man with a winning smile who loved people and was loved back. Grace O'Malakumar, also 19, was a gifted medical student and a talented athlete who played for England's under-16 and under-18 hockey squads. She was following in her father's footsteps to become a doctor. Her family described her as an adored daughter and sister who was resilient and wise beyond her years. And Ian Coates, 65, was a beloved school caretaker at Huntingdon Academy, just 5 months away from retirement. He was a father, a grandfather, and a passionate Nottingham Forest fan who ran a fishing club for local children. His sons remember him as a selfless man who was everyone's friend. These were not statistics. They were bright, loved individuals with full lives ahead of them, lives that were about to tragically intersect with a man the system had failed to stop. On the evening of June 12, 2023, Calocane ominously warned his brother that something was about to happen. In the early hours of June 13, his abstract threats became a horrifying reality. CCTV showed him travelling from London to Nottingham, where he changed into all-black clothing and lay in wait in an area not covered by cameras. At approximately 4 a.m., Barnaby and Grace were simply walking home from an end-of-exam celebration when Calocane approached them on Ilkeston Road and, without warning, began stabbing them. With incredible bravery, Grace fought back, trying to protect Barnaby and screaming for help before the attacker turned his full force on her. Tragically, both students died from their injuries. An hour later, Calocane made his way to Magdala Road, where he found Ian Coates on his way to work. He stabbed the caretaker to death and stole his van. But his rampage wasn't over. At 5:23 a.m., he drove that stolen van directly into a man named Wayne Burkett on Milton Street, fracturing his skull and pelvis. Minutes later, he hit 2 more people, Sharon Miller and Marcin Goronsky. The wave of violence was only stopped when police finally managed to corner the van and taser Calocane, bringing his horrific attack to an end. The 3 survivors were left with life-changing physical and psychological injuries, with Wayne Burkett suffering a brain injury so severe he lost all memory of his life before the attack. In the aftermath, the city of Nottingham was left reeling. Valdo Calocane was charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. In January 2024, however, the prosecution accepted his plea to the lesser charge of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The reason? 5 separate psychiatrists, including those for both the prosecution and defense, all agreed that Calocane's paranoid schizophrenia was so severe that it had substantially impaired his ability to form a rational judgment and exercise self-control. One expert concluded the attacks were entirely attributable to his mental illness. Calocane was sentenced to an indefinite stay in a high-security hospital, where he will likely remain for the rest of his life. For the families of Barnaby, Grace, and Ian, the sentence was not justice. They felt let down and have fought tirelessly for accountability, demanding to know how Calocane, a man with such a long and violent history of mental illness, was free to walk the streets. The Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, put it bluntly, had the NHS done its job, 3 innocent people might still be alive. In response to the family's relentless campaign, a full public inquiry began in February 2026 to examine the conduct of the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the various healthcare agencies that failed to manage the risk Calocane posed. Police have since admitted that Calocane should have been arrested before the attacks. The inquiry continues to uncover a catalogue of failures, from missed arrest warrants to abysmal communication between the agencies that were supposed to protect the public. The question of accountability is at the very heart of this tragedy. What do you think needs to change in the mental health and justice systems to stop something like this from ever happening again? Let us know your thoughts, respectfully, in the comments below. The story of Valdo Calocane is a devastating portrait of systemic failure on almost every level. It's the story of 3 innocent lives, full of promise, that were brutally cut short. It's the story of Grace O'Malleycoomar's incredible bravery, for which she was posthumously awarded the George Medal, one of Britain's highest civilian honours for courage. Her father, Dr. Sanjoy Kumar, said his daughter placed friendship over fear, noting that her instinct was to stand by her friend rather than run to safety. And it is the story of a catastrophic breakdown in the systems designed to protect the public. Reports from the Care Quality Commission and NHS England have laid bare a series of missed opportunities and poor decisions that led to disaster. Today, the families of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malleycoomar, and Ian Coates continue their fight for truth, hoping that the lessons from this tragedy will finally lead to meaningful change and ensure no other family has to endure their reality.